Hello, buddy. Welcome back to the Tin Man Score channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and this is the third and final Midnight Tales video I'll be reacting to today. And it's for To Serve It True November Horror Stories. Now, I know November's already passed and everything, but I wanted to go ahead and react to it for you guys. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights off again, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction rolling in the back. Okie dokie, here we go.
I'm originally from a major city in southern Ohio, and outside of town, there are a number of smaller townships. One of these is known as the more country bumpkin slash redneck slash grit part of town.
Okay.
It's not even in the same county, but is considered part of the general area associated with my city. In the woods there's this legend of Hell's Church, supposedly an old church that burned down where Satanists now perform rituals, or alternatively, a Satanist church that burned down as part of a ritual, depending on who you ask. There are a number of Hell's Church myths in Ohio across different places, but this one was the closest to us. A number of my guy friends decided they wanted to be ghost hunters and check out haunted places around where we lived.
Seems like a fun activity to do, but here's the thing. If a place was once a satanic cult area, I don't know, I'll probably get goosebumps going in that type of place.
We were juniors in high school, and while all of us thought this was just stupid bullshit, we also found it funny to go out and scare ourselves. Plus, most people had cars or driver's licenses by then, so we were enjoying a new burst of freedom. I'm usually a scaredy cat about most stuff like this, but I was the most tomboyish girl in the group and always wanted to hang with the guys.
I mean, I'm glad that you guys got your driver's license and you got freedom to drive around and stuff, but trying to scare you guys to near death is not a funny thing to do.
Some of the girls in the group, who I was closer to, were also going, so I didn't want to look like a loser or a coward. One day in November, we decided to go out one night and try to find this church. We had actually been to this location once before that fall, but one of my friends had a curfew, so after exploring an old barn and the railroad tracks on a bridge nearby, we left. We hadn't found the church, supposedly just a chimney at this point, to our disappointment and my mild relief. We took 2 cars out there, passing through more populous parts of our city and heading back to this wooded area. I can't honestly tell you how we got out there, but I know it involved driving off a state highway, down an abandoned access road, past an old warehouse, and then onto a dirt road. Once we got down the dirt road, there was a thicker section of the road early on where we parked off the shoulder. We did this because the road thins out and becomes impossible to drive down. Plus, it was clear someone owned the land. Further down, there was some no trespassing signage. I assumed a lot of kids came back there, so it didn't seem too strange that they wanted to block it off. I barely thought twice about it at the time. We got out of our cars and started walking down the dirt road, occasionally wandering off the path to check out barns or clearings where we thought the chimney might be. At first, it was just scary because it was dark and old, but then the barns started getting weirder. They were filled with strange spray-painted symbols and other things, which we assumed were done by previous visitors, and I still 100% believe that. However, there were other, more disturbing things too, like dead owls that appeared to have been opened up, though they were dried out and decomposed by the time we saw them. It was gross, but we all agreed that they were likely left by teenagers trying to fake a satanic ritual.
Either that or animals came in and started eating on them. You never know.
Or maybe the animals had died after getting trapped and then scavenged by other animals.
See?
My friends were determined to find this stupid chimney, so they kept heading into clearings and through the trees. Myself and the other 2 girls hung back along the tree line, feeling more nervous and irritated as we continued to come up empty. As we pressed on, we found a bike near the tree line, the kind that a 12-year-old might ride. It was creepy, but we rationalized it, figuring it probably belonged to someone who owned the land. Not long after, we found another bike, this one older and a bit rusted, but still small. We didn't discuss it much, just mumbling that it was probably nothing. One or two of the four guys started joking. Maybe these kids got murdered, but none of us were really entertained. By this point, we had been there for about 2 hours and it was getting really late. We were all a bit more creeped out than we wanted to admit. We decided to head back to the cars, and I was relieved to be leaving. But things never go that smoothly, do they? Near the cars, we noticed a road that went straight up a hill through the trees. At the start was a big metal gate with a road closed sign, which we had seen before, but it hadn't occurred to us to try going up the road. We had a small debate about whether to go up or not. I was firmly against it. But eventually, we decided to check it out, especially since both drivers wanted to go. We climbed over the gate and started up the hill. The old paved road was cracked and crumbling beneath our feet, clearly a real asphalt road at one point. There were fallen trees across the path, purposefully blocking cars from passing. Some of us started seriously questioning whether we should continue, but we got teased into pushing on. The road was steep, making it hard to see where it ended, and the tree cover obscured the sky, leaving only a hint of moonlight. Suddenly, the trees opened up to reveal a flat field. It was a large clearing, with tall prairie grass about 3 feet high on either side of the path, which led to a cul-de-sac with 3 buildings. 2 looked like farmhouses, and 1 was barn-like. The buildings were wooden, weathered, and stripped of any original paint. Seeing this, I was done. I wanted to leave. But of course some friends insisted on exploring the buildings. I finally put my foot down, as did the other 2 girls and 1 guy, who decided this was enough for him, our valedictorian, probably the smartest one among us. The 3 guys who wanted to explore the buildings told us to wait. We didn't want to be in the open field, but couldn't bring ourselves to leave. The moonlight was bright enough to see without flashlights, so we turned them off. We watched as our friends entered one of the buildings, their flashlight beams flickering through the windows. It was like a horror movie come to life. After what felt like forever, but was probably around 10 minutes, we saw our friends jogging back, looking genuinely scared. "You idiots went inside?" I said, furious at them. One of them looked at me and said words I'll never forget. It was full of bikes, just bikes chained to the walls. We didn't believe them at first, thinking they were joking, but they were dead serious. They looked shaken. These weren't the kind of guys to keep a prank going for this long. At this point, we all agreed we needed to leave. As we hurried down the hill, we saw headlights near our parked cars. The vehicle moved slowly past, and we realized someone was looking for us. Since this was so far off the beaten path, we figured it could be one of 2 things: the cops, in which case we'd be in trouble for trespassing, or the landowners, or someone else. And our options were: A, they'd call the cops; B, they'd confront us, or worse. We picked up the pace, whispering as we hurried down the hill. I'm a bad runner, but I was sprinting, practically leaping over fallen trees.
And they noticed a car there that ain't one of their friends or members of their group, then, oh yeah, they're coming to investigate, for sure. So it's better that you guys hide in the woods until they move right past your car and then get to your car and go.
Once we reached the bottom, we no longer saw the headlights, but knew they couldn't be far. "Get in the cars," one of our friends shouted. We fumbled with the doors, panicked. As we started the cars, we saw the headlights again, a giant black truck barreling towards us. It felt larger than life, lifted high off the ground. Terrifyingly, we couldn't see who was driving due to the blinding headlights. We peeled out of there, going as fast as possible. The truck chased us, getting dangerously close as if trying to run us off the road. Both cars weaved through traffic on the highway. not wanting to get separated, but desperately trying to escape. After about 15 minutes, we finally lost the truck, either due to distance or because it turned around. We pulled into a Sonic parking lot and sat in silence, watching to make sure we weren't followed. Shaken, we eventually got out, got food, and talked. Even the tough guys were rattled. Despite all our speculating, we couldn't make sense of what had happened. We finally went home, the ride silent with exhaustion and lingering fear. We didn't talk about it for a long time. We never called the police, which, looking back, we probably should have. I don't think about it often, only during the fall. But when I do, I have questions that still haunt me. Who chased us? Why was that place abandoned? Who owned those bikes? And where are they now?
That's an interesting question right there. I would say that they're probably dead, because if they got their bikes hanging up, then something bad might have happened to them. And then you guys being there, discovering that, oh, they were coming to make sure that you guys didn't talk. But I'm glad you got out of there to get away from them guys. I'm glad it wasn't no satanic stuff going on right there. That'd be a horrific sight to see as well.
I'm a late 20s female, and this incident happened fairly recently. Nothing bad happened to me, but I'm lucky it didn't. And it easily could have. There is a conservation area that I used to enjoy walking in regularly. It's situated beside a golf course, near an ordinary subdivision, just off a busy road, and is popular with dog walkers and photographers. The conservation area is well maintained and has signs informing users that there are hidden cameras throughout. My point in emphasizing this is to show that by all appearances, this is a very safe, ordinary, urban wooded area in a populated region.
I ain't gonna lie, but this looks so peaceful. I would like to walk over that bridge and explore this park.
A significant thing about me is that I prefer isolation to recharge. I dislike crowded trails, so I typically go during off-peak hours or when the weather is less appealing, too cold, lightly raining, foggy, etc. I make sure to stay safe, but I like to be alone whenever possible. In a city during daylight, I never felt I was taking any substantial risks by doing this. One day, I went around 4 p.m. on a frigid, rainy Monday in November. On days like that, I might see one or two dog walkers, but on this occasion, the parking lot was empty, except for a dirty blue pickup truck with a man sitting inside. I noticed him looking at me, but it didn't bother me much. I was mostly pleased that the trail seemed empty. On that day, I planned to practice my navigation skills using a compass. It's good to practice in a familiar area, so I decided to go off-trail into a large pine plantation. This area is a big open space with mature pine trees and isn't particularly interesting or meant for hiking. You wouldn't get there unless you intentionally wanted to. I chose my first landmark, sighted it with my compass, and started pacing towards it. I was about halfway there when I heard rustling through the bushes. Turning around, I saw the man from the dirty blue pickup entering the pine plantation. He appeared to be a white man in his mid-50s, somewhat overweight, wearing a baggy beige cardigan and blue slacks. Something about this felt off. I tried to dismiss it, not wanting to overreact or ruin my peaceful time outdoors. I continued walking around with my compass, pretending not to notice him. When I looked, he pretended to ignore me. Despite trying to remain calm, I had a strong gut feeling that something wasn't right. But I have an anxiety disorder, and told myself not to jump to conclusions. To test if he was following me, I pivoted 180 degrees and walked directly back toward the trail. He followed me. I walked through the bushes and onto the trail. He was still behind me. At this point, I knew something was wrong. The entrance to the pine plantation was only about 50 feet along the trail. For this man to have followed me in, then left so quickly, didn't add up. He was definitely following me. I hurried out of the trail, and as I drove away, I noticed he was still watching me. I took a longer route home that day. The experience shook me up, and I only visited the area once more before the second encounter. This occurred in January. I wanted to go bird watching, as I had seen an owl in the same pine plantation while practicing navigation a week prior. Hoping to spot the owl again, I visited at around the same time, an hour before sundown. There was no blue pickup truck in the parking lot this time, but two other cars were there, a red sedan with heavily tinted windows and what appeared to be an empty vehicle. As I started on the trail, I quickly heard footsteps behind me. While I don't enjoy having people walk behind me, I figured I'd lose them when I veered off trail into the pine plantation. Unfortunately, I heard rustling again shortly after entering the plantation, and turned to see the same man from before. A wave of terror and dread washed over me. Alone in a muddy forest with what seemed to be a stalker, it was horrifying, though the atmosphere was otherwise calm and mundane. To confirm my fears, I walked over to the area where I had previously seen the owl and paused. The same man was right there beside me. Panic surged through me, and every instinct told me to run. I walked briskly back to the trail, passing another man in the pine plantation as I went. I barely noticed him, smiling automatically when he acknowledged me. He smiled back. It wasn't until I reached the parking lot that I realized the second man's presence might be connected to the first. I quickly jotted down the license plates of the two cars. The original man arrived at the parking lot as I was leaving. As I walked away, he called out, "Can I give you a ride?" I shook my head and kept walking. He then followed me in his car, waiting at an intersection to see which way I'd go. I entered a busy park to lose him. He pulled into a nearby hidden driveway and watched me, appearing to take photos. After noting the direction I was heading, he did a U-turn and drove off quickly. I took a roundabout way home, filed a police report, and an investigation was opened. Since then, I haven't returned to the conservation area, and the incident has left me with lingering nervousness about being alone outdoors. The fact that there was a second man involved, whom I barely saw, only deepens my unease. While the police told me they couldn't do much, I remain vigilant and try not to let the experience completely rob me of my love for nature walks. I know that nothing bad happened that day, but I'm convinced it was only because I managed to escape before anything could.
You know, that is kind of odd that you see the same guy from November in the cold month of January at the same place, but then another man shows up and seems to be more nicer. So something tells me that that guy might have been in charge of the entire stalking people out thing, and the other guy might be his henchman. You never know. Or they're happy to be buddies. Probably looking for vulnerable women to kidnap. It's a bunch of sickos in this world, I tell you.
At the time this happened, I was a 13-year-old girl. This was 2 years ago, and I was fairly naive. I was a major introvert with only a few friends in my class. I wanted to be social, but preferred to be alone, reading or writing. Classic nerd things. In early November, I received a text on my phone from a few classmates whose numbers I had, as well as one or two I didn't recognize. It was a group chat asking if we wanted to hang out at night near a park by our school. My parents were strict and paranoid, so they would never have let me go. Luckily, or what I thought was luck at the time, they were heading out for an overnight trip. They would be back around 4 in the morning. Everything seemed to fall into place. Once my parents left around 8 p.m., I ran out the door and headed to the park. One thing I made sure to do was lock the door. My parents were paranoid, after all, and it was their biggest rule that they drilled into me. When I arrived at the park, I noticed a creepy figure near the edge of the woods. No one else seemed to notice, and since I already had a reputation as a weirdo obsessed with true crime, I didn't mention it. The night wore on, and I was having the time of my life, ignoring the gut feeling telling me to run. Every so often, I would glance over my shoulder, and the man was still standing there. Around 9:45 p.m., 4 out of the 10 people there had to leave due to their curfew, It was getting cold, and it was nearly pitch black, except for a few streetlights scattered around. The rest of us decided to leave as well, since the atmosphere had become eerie and quiet. The area we were hanging out in was a field enclosed by a fence with a few exits and entrances. It was a large, wide field with a small park at the back, and our massive middle school behind us. The front of the field faced an empty road, while the right and left sides were bordered by forest. The remaining people were getting picked up by cars, so they headed toward the parking lot, which was in the opposite direction of the road. Meanwhile, the man was standing near the right forest road exit, which I needed to take to get home. I walked away from my group, trying to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but all the true crime stories I had consumed were catching up with me. The man appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with dark hair, a beard, and standing about 5'9", though at the time, he seemed more like 6 feet to me. He was standing roughly 10 feet from the exit, so as soon as I got close, I ran about 30 feet through the exit and into the woods. Once I felt somewhat safe, I slowed down to a brisk walk, aiming to reach the road. I heard a snap and a crunch from behind me. I stopped for a moment and quickly looked over my shoulder. Around 15 feet behind me was the same man, walking slowly as if trying not to appear suspicious. His behavior only deepened my fear. I turned and started walking faster, practically jogging. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park, and I wasn't athletic enough to run the entire way. After 7 minutes of fast walking, I reached my neighborhood. At that point, I knew I could sprint to my house if necessary. I checked behind me, and to my horror, the man was only 5 feet away. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had before. I could hear his footsteps pounding against the concrete as he chased me. I dove into an alleyway I knew well, trying to lose him by taking a longer route through a nearby park. I heard his heavy breathing and footsteps as he tried to keep up. I cut through houses, backyards, and front yards until I finally reached my house. I flew up the steps, looked behind me, and saw him at the bottom of the stairs. I unlocked the door, burst through it, and slammed it shut just as he hit it with his whole body. I ran around the house, locking all the windows, turning off the lights, and hiding in my bedroom with a kitchen knife, just in case he managed to get in.
You see, sometimes you can't outrun these potential predators because they could seem to catch up to you at any moment, know where you live. Oh, I think hanging out at the park with your friends that night might have been a bad idea.
Thankfully, he didn't. If this were a better world, that would be the end of my story. But it wasn't. For months, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out. I stopped hanging out with people and returned to my loner status. Writing horror stories became my way of coping, and I never stayed out past 7 p.m. anymore. In February, a classmate of mine shared a story about being followed home by a random man while riding the bus. She described him almost exactly as I remembered. Dark hair, beard, and all. Another girl mentioned that he sounded like the guy who had tried to follow her home from school. I didn't join the conversation, but everyone agreed he was just a weird guy. Over time, he was forgotten, and I tried to move on too. In May, as I was getting ready to walk to school, my mom pulled me aside and showed me a picture of a man, the man who had stalked me. She told me he had been arrested 2 weeks earlier for assaulting a child and had escaped the night before. She instructed me to keep an eye out and call the police if I saw him. I was shaking the entire way to school. It haunts me to know that if he had caught me that night, I might have ended up like his victim, or worse.
Yeah. Glad you got in the house real quick and bolted the door before he got in. I'm telling you, there's a bunch of sick people in this world. Think they can follow kids home and then, assault them. He is just one nasty scumbag, I tell you. I hope they do get him.
This occurred in 2017, and it is 100% true. Due to a multitude of factors, including the recent death of a close friend, I was unbearably depressed at this time in my life. For that reason, my family flew across the country to visit me in LA, where I lived. We thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent that it was the off-season. It was late November. The weather was cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty except for locals and a few straggling tourists like ourselves. Our first priority was to drop off our luggage so we could explore the island, so we immediately checked into our motel, though that word hardly does the place justice. I call it a motel because all the doors to the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality, our room was one of 20 or 30 quaint guesthouse-looking buildings, arranged in a sort of horseshoe shape around a walkway, with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one point of the horseshoe, and if you walked straight, you would reach the room we were given, which was located at the corner, before you had to turn right to go further into the horseshoe. From our room, one path led back to the street, while the other went deeper into the secluded maze of rooms. After a day of exploring, and having just finished dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and let me just say, it gets dark. Similarly, dark was my headspace after our dinner conversation took a turn, and my overwhelming depression got the best of me. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them I just needed to go to sleep. And I did, immediately. Depression sometimes makes that easy. I was already losing consciousness as they entered the room after me, drifting off without even a good night. I then woke up to my mom saying my name, a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, my parents' bed closer to the door, and mine, further in the room. My mom's voice cut through the silence again. She sounded concerned for me. I didn't blame her, considering my mental state at the time. Groggy, I rolled over. "What?" I asked. As my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains, I saw her turn to face me. She looked, surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes widened. If I was in my bed, then who had she been talking to? We both looked back to where she had been looking moments before, and saw a hooded figure in all black standing over their bed. Please understand how horrifically startling it is to be on an island in the middle of the ocean, and wake up to see a hooded stranger looming over you. That moment seemed to stretch on forever. Life isn't like the movies, where characters let out blood-curdling screams. Sometimes, the only sound that comes out is something panicked and guttural. My mom's voice became low and severe as she called my dad's name in a tone I had never heard before. Then, the hooded figure did something bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance toward us, but instead crouched in the corner near where it had been standing. The way it crouched was so unexpected, even given the already unsettling situation. It seemed animalistic. I knew 2 things for sure. The hooded figure had been standing over us while we slept, and it was acting in a way I couldn't comprehend. Unlike the seemingly endless moment when the figure was standing over us, the events that followed when my hulking ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly, we were out the door, not knowing which direction the intruder had gone. My mom was screaming, "Get him! Get him!" My dad was running down one path of the horseshoe, further into the motel, shouting with pure adrenaline, "I'm going to fucking kill you." I ran in the other direction toward the street. When I got there was no sign of the intruder. The area became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room and found my dad walking back, his head low. He got close to me and quietly said, "It's a fucking kid." The explanation? A young teen, tall and lanky like me in my 20s, wearing all black, including a black hoodie, had entered the wrong room, our room. The one time my parents happened to forget to lock the door. My mom woke up when he entered, and seeing a tall person in a black hoodie, thought it was me, presumably leaving the room in a depressive episode. When the hooded figure crouched, it was because he realized his mistake and panicked. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugged the kid, who was now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier had been sprinting after me with murder in his eyes.
Yeah, I don't blame the kid for being all upset about getting lost in a place like they were describing too, if it was shaped like a big size horseshoe. And plus, getting the angry guy chasing you out the door, oh, nobody don't want to experience that. Now that kid's probably going to have bad trauma for the rest of his life now. But I'm glad they apologized and heard him out. But anyway, that's going to be it for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more Midnight Tales reactions like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor. I say that's a wrap, and have a nice day.